This is an oral history review for the Witness to War project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and the community which you reside in.
I am Charles William Burlin, and I live in North Chatham, Massachusetts.
How old were you when you joined the military?
19.
Were you drafted?
No.
Did your mother like the idea of you going into the military?
Yes.
Where did you grow up, and also where were you born?
I was born in Washington, D.C., and I grew up all over the United States. It's off again now. All over the United States, including Texas and Colorado and Buffalo, New York, and Panama Canal Zone, and Philadelphia. And
When did you graduate from high school?
graduated from high school in 1939 and graduated from college in 1943.
What was your life like before the military?
It was a wonderful life for a youngster. I traveled all over the United States and overseas.
What was the Naval Academy like?
Naval Academy was a very, very fine institution to go to school, and had a technical education in naval engineering, which is very good to do to get in.
Where were you first stationed?
My first day at the Naval Academy was a hustle and bustle, carrying heavy loads of uniforms, books, and down in the issuing office up to a third floor room in the Naval Academy dormitory, Bancroft Hall. And busy, learning all the things I had to learn on that first day.
Were you scared of what could happen?
I was first stationed at the Naval Academy, first day. Was I scared? No. I was always interested in the Naval Academy and knew quite a bit about it.
What did your family think of you?
Here we go again.
What did your family think of you joining the military?
They thought it was wonderful. My dad was in the Army, so it was a wonderful thing to do.
And you didn't have, and what family did you leave behind, like a wife or a child?
Oh no, I just left my parents and my brothers, that's all.
What was the training like for the military entail? Was it hard?
I was training for the military. Training for the military was in the Naval Academy for 3 years. And was it hard? Yes.
Did you feel a sense of honor serving your country?
Oh, I sure did. My dad had served in the Army in World War I and through the 1930s. He was an Army veteran.
What is your best memory from your military service?
Well, there are many memories. Memories of the submarine that I served on in World War II, and the 4-engine airplanes I flew in Korea, and my duties in Washington, D.C. and the Pentagon and the Office of Naval Research, all of those. Very good.
Do you have any medals? If so, what?
I have some right there, and I can, you want to pass that over so you can see it? This is a display of my medals and decorations. I was a pilot, I was a submariner, I flew airplanes and I flew airships. I had a very varied career, probably a unique career.
What is your scariest memory from your military service?
Coming back from the submarine war patrols to the United States and seeing my wife again. And at the time, we had a 1-year-old child.
What is your happiest moment?
That was it, right there.
What was your saddest?
I don't really have much in the way of sad memories. I have mostly good memories.
Did you have any friends join the military service with you? If so, how many?
There were 4 of us that went to Upper Darby High School in the area of Philadelphia. 4 of us in my class that went into the Naval Academy in my class. That's pretty unique.
Do you still keep in touch with them?
Let's see. There are not too many of us left. I keep in touch with a few of them.
What was the best place you were stationed?
Paris, France.
What was life like overseas, the war front?
It was tough while you were out on patrol. When you were back from patrol, you could relax. But in the submarines, when you're out on patrol, you're always being hunted by the enemy. And so it's a tough grind all the time.
What was living in the submarine like?
It was tight and compact. There were 80 crewmen on a 300-foot submarine, and things were tight. You had to turn sideways to pass one another in the corridor. But living on a submarine was, I thought, much better than living in a battleship. I didn't like the big battleships.
What was being on the field like? If so, can you please explain in detail, please?
Being in the field, what does that mean?
Like, what were you doing on the submarine?
The submarine was out in the ocean.
Did you have a special job you were doing?
Did
you have a special job you were doing?
Special job I had, you say? Yes, I was communications officer on the submarine. It had to do with the radio, the radar, and the sonar.
What was Korea like?
Korea was a very unusual war. We were not fighting a war. We were letting the enemy decide what to do, and then we would react to it. World War II was quite different in that World War II was run by all the military generals, and the president was behind them. And Korea was a little different in that the political leaders in the United States were not fully behind it, and that made it a little difficult to fight. When you're fighting an enemy who can do things to you, but you can't do things to them. It's not very good. World War II was just the opposite. World War II was, if you saw an enemy, you acted like he was an enemy and did something about it.
Did you have to visit the hospital at all? If so, what for
No, I
what
wasn't
injury?
injured. I was very, very fortunate. I wasn't injured in either World War II or Korea.
Were you on the front lines?
I didn't have any injuries, as I say, but after the war, I had a knee replaced. I had various operations and things like that, but I wasn't injured in the war. No.
Were you on the front lines?
In Korea, yes, we were flying up over the front lines in a 4-engine airplane. We had a big bomb bay, and we carried flares at night, and the people on the ground would call on us to drop some flares and light up the battle line, and if the Chinese or the North Koreans were going to make an attack, they'd be able to see it. And so that was very interesting because we could see the tracers going back and forth across the main line of resistance and the explosions of the shells. And there was some anti-aircraft that came up at us, but it wasn't very close.
Did you lose anyone you knew?
Oh yes, in submarines, I was in a group of 9 submarines that went into the Sea of Japan through the minefields in Korea Straits, or Tsushima Straits as the Japs call them, and the submarine that was in the patrol area right next to my submarine was sunk by the Japanese in the Sea of Japan. It didn't come out.
Oh gosh.
So yes, I knew one of my classmates was on it.
How did you feel during your time that you served, emotion-wise?
Emotion-wise, how did I feel? I felt very good. I thought I did a good job and helped with finishing off the World War II and bringing the situation in Korea to a close, helping with it.
What was the technology like at the time during the wars you fought in?
The technology was much less complete than as you see today. We had radar, we had sonar in World War II, but we didn't have all the television and the communications, wristwatch communications and things like that. We didn't have any of that. It was very, very much old-fashioned compared to today.
Do you have any regrets thinking back on your time serving?
Do I have any regrets thinking back to my time serving? No, not at all.
Is there anything that you would do, have, or done differently?
No, I think I was very lucky and came through it without any problems. I had the chance to qualify in 3 different areas: the submarine, the airship, the lighter than air, and also the heavier than air, the 4-engine airplanes. So that was very, very good.
Can you explain what a sonar is?
Oh, on holidays, yes, you could join your family, or when you were back from the war, you you'd enjoy the United States and all its benefits.
Did you feel like you made any big mistakes?
I don't think so. I can't recall any.
Did the government take care of you when you got back? For example, did they support you when you got back? Did they do what they were supposed to?
Oh yes, the government, I was in the Navy. I stayed in the Navy for 25 years. And they had all the things that were needed for the troops. Sometimes the military budget was cut back usually by the Democrat administrations, and it was sometimes a little hard to get things that you needed, but other times there was enough. And they did what they were supposed to do, yes.
Was it hard to get back into the civilian routine of life?
No, not at all.
What was your first day back from the service like?
Back from the service? Very, very happy, very interested in what I was going to do. I had to make plans to get some other career going, and I did.
If you were asked to give any advice to the next generation of soldiers, and what would you say?
I would say that to the next generation of military, that this country has to be fully prepared for any aggression in the world. And I think that the President Trump has done a good job in starting to build up the military, because we have people in the world that are always anxious to take over somebody else's country. And of course, in World War II, that was Hirohito in Japan, Emperor Hirohito. And in Germany, it was Hitler. And then after World War II, in the Korean War, it was the Koreans and the North Koreans and the Chinese that wanted to seize territory. And further down the road, it was the Russians that wanted to seize territory. So there are always people that want to seize somebody else's country. Now, if we had lost World War II, you wouldn't be speaking English anymore. You'd be speaking Japanese or German. A lot of people don't realize that. And it's possible that we could have stayed neutral in World War II. We could have just said we don't want to fight. And eventually the Japs and the Chinese would have, or the Japs and the whatever the opposition was, would have conquered us. And we certainly don't know that, don't want to do that. So you have to maintain a strong military, and you have to maintain a positive outlook. And if there's any threats that are made to us, we have to counter them.
Do you think the U.S. military did the right thing during the war? Do you think the U.S. military did the right thing during the war?
I didn't hear you. Talk a little louder.
Do you think the U.S. military did the right thing during the wars that you fought in?
Still not. What is the what's the subject you want me to talk about?
Do you think the U.S. military did the right thing during the wars you fought in?
I'm still not understanding.
Do you think the U.S. military did the right thing during the wars you fought in?
Is this about my post?
Do you think the U.S. military did the right thing during your military service?
Do I think what about my military service?
Do you think the U.S. military did the right thing when you were fighting in the military?
Oh, you bet. You bet. The United States is the only power in the world that's willing to fight for our freedoms. And you have to remember that. It's a tough road to hoe if you don't do it. So, anyway, that's what I'd say to the next generation of soldiers, that they're fighting for a country that's worthwhile. It's the best country in the world, and it's something that you'll never see anywhere else in the world. You'll never be able to find a country like this in the world. It's such a good one.
What did you do after your military service?
Okay.
What did you do after your military service?
I went into research. I was in a research laboratory, and for a while, and then I went into property management. I had some property in Florida and some property up here in Massachusetts that needed management and full time from me, so I got into that. But the research laboratory work was very, very interesting and very educational for me.
How did you come to the Cape? How did you come to the Cape?
How do I?
How did you come to the Cape? How did you come to the Cape?
Oh, I came to the Cape when I was 1 year old. I was brought here by my father and mother. My grandfather bought property here in North Chatham back in 1897. And my father came up here as a boy. They lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, and they'd come down here summers. My father went to Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Then he got into the Army in World War I. But all the time we would come down to my grandfather's house in North Chatham on the next street over, Cranberry Lane, and spend the summer for a couple of months. And when I was 1 year old, my parents brought me down here to stay at my grandfather's place. And then from there on, except during the wars, I was able to get up here, coming in from high school and grammar school and all that. I'd come up here summers and essentially grew up here in the summers. It was very, very nice.
Was your grandfather in the military? Was your grandfather in the military?
No. He came over from Sweden. And came over as a young boy, as a matter of fact. And it's kind of interesting. He was 18, and he, by himself, left his home in Sweden, crossed the English Channel to England, and crossed England and went out from Liverpool on a ship for Boston. And he was an iron worker. He was in Sweden. He was an iron worker, blacksmith you'd call it here. But in this country, he used his talents in ironworking to work for a big company out in Chicago, which I think is probably U.S. Steel now. And then he came back to the Pennsylvania oil fields and made tools for the oil drillers. And then came back to Worcester and became a supervisor of forgings for the Whiten's Machine Works in Worcester area. So he did very well, and he bought the property here in Chatham in 1893, as I said, and then, or 97, I guess it was. And then the families have been here ever since, coming up in summers.
When did you meet your wife?
When did I meet my wife? Right here in Chatham. She was down here doing some child care work for one of the summer residents, and she was in school up in Boston in college, and we met on the beach here in North Chatham. And we went together for a couple of years, and then we got married at the Naval Academy.
How did she feel that you were in the military? How did she feel that you were in the military?
How did I hear about the military?
How did she feel that you were in the military? Was she scared that you were in the military?
Oh, she was very glad to be with me, and all the duty stations I had. I was in the Navy for 25 years and moved from coast to coast. I was in submarines to begin with out in the far Pacific, and then she was here back in California waiting for me. And when I got back, we came back to New Jersey, and I went into airship training, and then we stayed in New Jersey, and then after that, I went down to Pensacola to learn how to fly big airplanes. And then I went back out into the Pacific, and she came to the West Coast and stayed while I was out in the Pacific. Then we came back to Key West, Florida. I went to graduate school in California. I got a Master of Science degree in Operations Research, and in the Navy. And then we went to Key West, Florida for 3 years in airships down there. We came back up to Washington for 4 years, and then overseas to Paris for 3 years, where I was in NATO. I was in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and I was working on targeting Russian sites for attack in case the Russians started a war. We had to have the targets planned out to hit back at the Russians if they decided to start a war. But it was very interesting being in Paris, and I was able to get around. As a family, we went all the way up to Sweden and saw my grandfather's property up there. And we went to all the different countries, Germany and France, and England a little bit, Spain. We went all the way down to the Straits of Gibraltar, but didn't get across to Africa, unfortunately. But anyway, it was a very good 3 years in Paris, and I can't complain about any of it. My Navy service was just wonderful.
Do any of your family members currently serve in the military? Have any of your family members ever served in the military?
Yes, I have. I have my middle son that went to the Naval Academy and graduated in 1969. My oldest son was in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War. My middle son that went to the Naval Academy was in Vietnam too. So yes, I did have family that was in the military.
And that's it.